The idea for this workshop for me really began in January with the shooting death of Laney student Lamar Broussard. And several faculty members met at that point to discuss the issue of gun violence that some of our students face each day. I did print out copies, optimistically, about 20 of them, of that article that ran in the Laney Tower that was covering the event when the faculty members met. Following that, there was a campus-wide email that included a link to Laney student Courtney Thomas's poignant article in the Post newspaper, which I'm going to ask her to read in just a few minutes. Do you have a copy?
Yes.
I do, if you could share.
I could follow along.
And during all this, I thought of my own former student, the Tower reporter named Leon Reese. This was 11 years ago, and he was a victim of gun violence. I wrote a piece about him, and he actually had been working on an editorial about violence and drugs in Oakland. And he was really writing about the hypocrisy of our drug culture, and perhaps if we get into that area, I'll read that open forum piece. Also, again, it's coming together. I read Tammy Drummond's piece in the July 6th Oakland Tribune, her column under the headline, Program Targeting Female Gun Buyers, which I found a very provocative headline and a very interesting article. Tammy had just returned from a night fellowship in Boston. Neiman Fellowship, I'm sorry, in Boston, where she's studying, among other things, gun violence in the inner city. And I guess the big question is there anything we can do to help keep our students safe from violence? So I've invited people who deal with this issue of violence in Oakland to help enlighten us, and I thank them for coming. And I'm going to ask, we'll have Courtney read the letter, and then I'll ask people to speak for a few minutes on their perspective of how we can best keep our students safe from violence, and then perhaps open up for discussion and with some questions.
Okay, so the title of it is called The Sister Epidemic. Oakland has become a very dangerous place to live. There are shootings happening every day, and every time you turn around, someone is getting killed. Although I have lived in Oakland for 21 years, I've never seen a dead body, but I've seen guns and drugs in all my life. Excuse me. I am a sister of an older brother that is in the street life. That's my reality. My brother lets me know things that I need to know, or like he says, he puts me up on game, so I can be aware of the things going on and keeping myself safe. We've developed a relationship that is unbreakable. My brother is my best friend. I tell him everything, and he does the same. But I'm always dreading a knock on the door where I could be told that my brother has been killed. The epidemic of gun violence directly affects the women in our community. As a woman, we have to worry about our fathers, sons, cousins, nephews, and in my case, my brother, being gunned down. People don't understand that we are the ones that hurt the most because of the loss. Here in Oakland, people take revenge on friends and loved ones when someone kills someone that they know. Naturally, I'm afraid. Whenever he leaves the house, I hear a knock on the door, and I hesitate to answer, thinking that someone is going to give me the worst news of my life. On August 16, 2013, I had to experience the pain and hurt of losing someone that was very close to me. Sorry, excuse me.
It's okay.
He was shot down in Sabrani Park. This event took a toll on me, and I began to worry about my brother more because he was really close to the man gunned down in the park. Shortly after, there was a shooting on 104th and International. I woke up to a phone call from my friend asking me what happened, and I was confused when the person began to tell me about the event. The first thing I did was to go look for my brother. I didn't care about anyone else. I just wanted to make sure my brother was okay. My heart was beating so fast, it was crazy. When I found out that he was okay, my heart was at peace. However, on April 24th, 2014, might have been the saddest day of all. My brother got a phone call from his dad to check on our cousin, but when he got over there, police were surrounding the area. Eventually, we found out it was because my cousin was laying dead in her car. She had been shot in the head. The gun violence needs to stop in Oakland. It's really getting worse. I sit and worry about my younger siblings, especially my little brother, who is only 14 and getting ready to start high school, the place where the violence is starting.
Thank you. Thank you. Would you like to tell us a little bit about what you're doing with your program?
Hello everyone. Thank you, Courtney, for sharing that. My name is Demetria Huntsman, and I'm from Teens on Target program here in Oakland. We're a community-based nonprofit organization, and we have 3 programs that really strive to impact the violence that we see in Oakland. The Teens on Target program that I oversee is a prevention program that develops students as violence prevention educators. We have a Caught in the Crossfire program that does intensive case management for those who are victims of violence up to the age of 24. It usually starts from the bedside, and their case remains open from anywhere from 1 to 3 years. And then the Gaddafi Washington Project is a program in which support services are fostered to families who have just lost a loved one to violence in Oakland. So we definitely see it on many different levels, and I just appreciate you putting out your very personal story. So glad to be here with you all.
Hi, I'm Tammy Drummond, and thank you for inviting me. And I think we need to hear more of those kind of stories is what we really need. But so I've been writing about gun violence in Oakland since 2008. I think my perspective is a little bit different from a lot of reporters, as I actually was living in East Oakland until I went on my fellowship program near Foothill Square, and my house is on the same street as where Lamar was shot. And I was away when I saw it, but I saw the house up the street in the news and saw exactly where it happened. I think as a journalist, one of the things that I try to think about is sort of what is our role. And one of the problems is that a lot of the coverage tends to be very much like it's just kind of a long-running police blotter, right? And you don't really have any kind of sense of historical context. You don't have any understanding of what's driving the shooting. You don't have any real look at sort of the impact on people, the ripple effect, like what you're describing. And it's kind of that you have this situation where there's a shooting, and then you have a lot of TV cameras, but then you kind of move to the next shooting, and there's really sort of no understanding of how this is progressing and the kind of concentration of so many shootings in many of the same communities over time. So one of the things that I was trying to look at when I was away, and it was a fellowship, it's called the Neiman Fellowship at Harvard, and you take like 10 months to really work on a project. And so I was trying to basically soak up as much as I could about learning about kind of the roots of urban gun violence. And I kind of took away a couple of things from this experience. One is that, there's many different kinds of gun violence. And even, when we have shootings here, it's very different if you have someone who is, shooting up on International Boulevard because they're trying to take out one of their rivals and they accidentally strike a child. as opposed to someone who deliberately goes out and tries to shoot a child because they're trying to get, it's some kind of retribution. And so one of the things that I think that we kind of need to look at is really, because you're not going to be able to get all the guns off the street, not to say that you don't try to take as many of them off as you can, but I'm really kind of interested in looking at how you change social attitudes around and kind of acceptability around gun carrying and around using guns to solve disputes. And I think that kind of education piece is really what's needed. And I'm very familiar with your work. In fact, I'm trying to get with Ann Marks to do something on Caught in the Crossfire. But those kinds of pre-intervention intervention programs, I think, is really where a lot of our focus, and I'd like to see more resources going there.
Thank you, Tim.
I'm Susie Cagle. I'm also a journalist in Oakland, but I've only been reporting on gun violence here for about the last year and a half. And started when we got a little bit of funding from a National Women Media Action Fund to look at the data around gun violence in Oakland. It's turned into a kind of an experiment in our own responsibility as reporters to how we kind of shepherd a story to an audience. And I think that we've actually, personally, we've stepped back and we're looking at how to do this differently. Because the first thing that we did was we made a shooting map. It's kind of everyone's first step of let's tell the story about gun violence, and we've seen projects like Homicide Watch, other projects that are city specific, and that's the first step is let's look at where this problem happens. And what we found was that wasn't really serving the people who this is happening to. They know where this happens. They know the neighborhoods that are affected by this. They live there. It really kind of served as a I don't know, it was an odd tool for people who aren't affected. And it was a disappointing but really salient learning experience for us. So now we're looking at trying to do this more long-term context around gun violence and really looking at issues of systemic trauma and treating systemic trauma, especially in children. And I think that's something that we've seen a lot more focus on across the country in urban communities over the last couple of years, which is great. And also in terms of just picking up the pieces, what is that? How do you humanize the victims and the perpetrators? Because that's the only way that we're going to understand how these things happen. So one of the things that we're doing, I have a reporter right now who's talking to people in the illegal gun trade in Oakland about why they do this and what's happening there. And these are difficult stories to report. One issue that we've had is that a lot of people don't want to work with us. We've got funding for journalism in Oakland, and we can't find journalists. So if an open call, if you guys want to work with us, or if you know people who might want to work on these projects, we're really open, and we would love to do something that's responsible to Oakland, and serves the community here, but is also of national importance, and maybe gives people a different perspective on Oakland. I think that right now, the city is changing, and we have a new influx of white people with money, and there's a perception that we should say nice things about the city. Crime is going down. We should be positive because things are changing, and I think it's important that, those things can be true, but we can also still talk about the problems that are existing and how we can address those at the same time. Those things can be true at the same time.
I'm LeRon Armstrong. I'm a lieutenant of police for the Oakland Police Department. I have two assignments within the police department. My first assignment is the commander of youth and school services, and then my second assignment is more the community liaison for our Operation Ceasefire. Our Operation Ceasefire is the department's violence reduction strategy that really focuses on individuals that are at risk of being a victim of violence or potentially committing a violent act. And so really it's the department's effort to focus our resources on the individuals that are directly involved in violence. And so it's an intelligence-based strategy that really focuses on those that we know are committing violent acts within the city and going directly with them and having direct communication, really talking to them about what their exposure is, whether it's for exposure to potential danger or the exposure to potential arrest and facing significant time in jail. And so we work in partnership with our community-based organizations as well as community members to offer them an opportunity to take advantage of some of the resources that the city provides and some of the resources that our clergy community provides. And so it also allows our clergy and community members to connect with young people that are at risk of violence and really talk to them about how important their lives are to the citizens in Oakland, that every time somebody is shot, somebody is killed, it has an impact on the city as a whole. One of the difficult things for me is that, I was born and raised in Oakland and educated in Oakland, and my brother was killed in Oakland, and so my passion for doing law enforcement is truly making this community safe. And so every day when you hear this young lady's story, it reminds me of the violence that has impacted my own life, and the fact that even officers, when they experience that same level of trauma of being out on scenes where people lose their lives, it has an impact on them as well. And that we understand firsthand what it's like to deal with the families that are victims of this violence, and working directly with those families and doing everything we can to bring the individual responsible to justice. And so we advocate not only for finding the individual, but working closely with Youth Alive and community-based organizations to help provide give the family resources to deal with this trauma. Because I remember back when my brother was killed 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago, those resources didn't exist. That trauma was not dealt with, and that my mother went on for years really devastated by the fact that she lost my brother. And I think as a family we were devastated, and so I really appreciate the work that Gaddafi Foundation does, as well as Youth Alive, being there for these families that have to deal with this violence.
Thank you. Comments? It's a huge issue with many different elements, aspects to it. Anybody want to make any comments or ask questions of any of our panelists?
Needing to get to the heart of the culture, what is it that allows all these people, primarily young people, but some older as well, in Oakland, who have experienced so much violence, to continue to perpetuate that violence and to continue to be victims of that violence? And how do we address the mental health component of it? Because one of the students that I knew over the years, his friend got murdered, and that was really awful. But then he managed to recover, and he came back, and then he got jumped, and he got kicked all to hell. And at that point, he snapped after all of the murders that he witnessed and all the energy he'd taken into turning all of his rage and desire for vengeance into turfing, and then getting into college and bringing this other one with him, and the young one that he brought with him got murdered. He snapped, and he ended up going out and getting a gun and committing a double homicide, and it was very premeditated. He planned it over the course of his healing from his broken leg. The question I have is, how do we address that, and how do we include people of all age groups, not just the victims of the violence directly, and those who are almost directly affected like Courtney, but those of us who don't live in the neighborhood but are so connected to it that we still see it, and we get to the point where you're sitting here with this thing in my throat. How do we include all of us? We actually had, Alicia inspired something at the beginning of the previous term, the spring term, where we were trying to talk about how do we change the culture of violence overall in places like Oakland so that we can stop this pattern, because it seems to me that whether we have a whole lot of guns on the street or not, you have to make a choice about whether or not you're going to participate in it. Whether you live on the streets and you're directly impacted by it every day, you're indirectly impacted, and you get to the point where you might be positioned to be part of the solution, help people who have come from nothing and who have been abused and battered to the point where they're now becoming abusers and batterers, help them get out of that cycle, but you're burnt and you can't do it anymore. And you have just enough privilege that you can get away from it, that you can move away from it. And you don't have a choice but to, because you're about to crack. How do we address all of that? How do we get everybody talking together? How do we get Youth Alive? How do we get the newspaper reporters who are focusing and doing the wonderful research and investigation that you're doing? How do we get Teens on Target? How do we get restorative justice? Everybody in the same place so that we can, because it seems so fragmented right now. We're all, there are so many people putting incredible intelligence and thought and care and emotion into looking at this. And we have a decrease in violence overall in terms of the numbers of bodies, but we don't have a decrease in the amount of trauma. How do we shift that?
I don't think I can answer all of it. But one of the things that I wanted to say is that some of the work to address violence is not going to be Gaddafi Washington work. And some of it is not going to be Youth Alive doing on-the-ground violence prevention work. Some violence prevention work is going to be ensuring that Measure Y gets passed. Some of it is going to be making sure that the resources are available for these different organizations to exist. We've been around since 1989. But we're hanging on by dental floss every year if the city's priorities continue to shift and change, if funding continues to be an issue, and if you have to put your energy into saving your funding versus really giving some dynamic service. And it shouldn't be a choice, and it's actually not. We just find a way to do it without it. But then why not just ensure that if we want to change as a city the culture of violence, then we make an investment that part of our culture is making sure that there are sustainable resources. So that's one. Violence prevention is not going to always look like on the ground violence work. Number two, I also feel like it is violence prevention to make sure that there are some wonderful opportunities for our young people to choose from. They don't have options. They don't see a black and white choice between I could be a part of the solution or part of the problem. They don't see that. It is very gray to them, and many of the things that they face that lead them into violence, they are parts of who they are. I'm born and raised in Oakland, and I actually went here to Laney, Merritt, Alameda, all of them combined, right? And so, for example, I just saw that there's a program for young men, or it could be young people. I don't know if it's women too, but like 18 to 24 can come in and do some mechanical engineering get down at Laney or Alameda or one of these schools, but it's like they got you for 1 to 2 years and then they want to move you into these jobs, right? Doing iron work or machinery or whatever. Those are the types of options that are also violence prevention. You could be staff here advocating for programs. We're the backdrop of Silicon Valley. How come we aren't transitioning into these jobs? How come we aren't transitioning into, all of these things, and all of these resources are not available to these people? Trust me, you give some people some good paying jobs, that will decrease some violence.
Oh, no, I know.
I'm not saying it to you. I'm just saying, like, in general, like, I'm saying that with definitive belief that, so sometimes it's not going to look like that. It's a lot of stuff. And then I do agree. I know, like, I was just talking to Officer Armstrong. They're doing an event. They want the young people to get involved. We just had a summer program. We had an officer come in and talk to young people and talk about bridging that gap between police officers and young people. And they're doing a huge community event. We're going to have young people there. Like, how great would it be to have, a basketball game at this event between, me personally, I like when we had the dunk tank and the police officers was in the tank. But
I didn't like it so much.
So, I think that there are several things that can be done, but I think one is the resources and the sustainability of those resources, And then if we say as a community that this is what we want, then we all have to get behind it and fight for it in a way to make sure that the work that you're doing here to ensure some academic program for young people, then, you know, I have to support that. Just like if I'm like, hey, we need this funding for Measure Y or we can't continue, then I need you to support that. And in that way, I think we can make an impact.
Could you tell us a little about Measure Y?
Can you tell us a little bit about Measure Y?
So, Measure Y is a voter-approved initiative where citizens pay a tax, a fee on their yearly to support the police department as well as other city services to fund that funding, some of which goes directly to violence prevention. Those violence prevention programs that she mentioned throughout the city, like Youth Uprising, like Youth Alive, and a lot of different programs that are impacted by that funding. And so it also supports our community policing efforts by providing to the police department additional funds to hire an additional 57 police officers, which obviously in a city with the shortage, a significant shortage in resources, is really impactful. Part of the funding also goes to fire prevention, so our fire department is able to maintain fire prevention in the hills, and so that tax is up for renewal. Without that particular partial tax, that would have a significant impact on the city's ability to provide those resources that we mentioned for young people, as well as law enforcement, police officer resources within the city. And so it have a definite impact on public safety. One of the things I'll say to answer your question is that in my nearly 20 years of doing law enforcement, I think really changing the social norm of how young people respond to conflict, right? I mean, you know, one of the things that happens from an early age is that we begin to believe, young people in this community believe that handling fights, handling conflict through altercations is the way in which you deal with them, right? I mean, we start off fighting in elementary school and then middle school, and then that kind of escalates into a mentality that believes that whenever something happens, I need to deal with it with a violent response. And so that not only is based on the person that's involved in that altercation, it's his friends, it's the people connected to him that's encouraging him to respond in a violent way. And we as a community have to change that norm, change that dynamic to say that you can handle problems without resorting to a violent response. Most of our officers that work for me have now been trained in restorative justice. And we're teaching our officers how to be engaged in that process and how to participate in that process so that young people can begin to talk out their issues and come up with a resolution that's nonviolent, right? And then once that problem is concluded, they can walk their separate ways and not feel as though they're threatened by the fact that you're gonna come back and do something to me, so then I have to respond to you. And right now, when we talk to these guys every day, when they're arrested for these violent acts, they consistently tell us that I have to carry a gun. Right? I have to, because I know that somebody is trying to do something to me. I'm in fear for my life. I have to carry a weapon. And it's sad to say that is their reality, right? Is that they feel like somebody is going to commit a violent act against them. And so in some ways, they feel like that's a means of protecting themselves. We have to change that dynamic to say that it can't be always a response by using violence to deal with these issues. And so I think these services go back to that, because this starts at an early age, and we need to stop that cycle of violence, deal with this early on so that young people don't find themselves in those really difficult places where they have to make really tough decisions about their lives. Because if you have a gun in your pocket and you get into a confrontation, that decision is very simple to make about pulling that firearm and using it against somebody else. And then the cycle kind of continues.
No?
Well, thank you, everybody, for being here. Certainly, I was working with Lisa early on with trying to get people at Laney to talk about things, because it's, as a faculty member here for over 10 years, it's been a little bit difficult to these students. So, one of the things when we talk about guns, and I've had so there's a couple of things I want to talk about. One is, are there people who would be willing to come and be guest speakers in our classrooms? Because I know I've had conversations, and I can't remember what exactly sparked the conversation, but it had to do with women. And I said, okay, in my class, so I asked the girls in the class, do you think you need a gun? They say, oh yeah. I'm not walking down the street without a gun, no way. And this has happened several times in my class. And so I'll talk to them and we'll talk about it. And certainly I can understand what they're saying. So this is what you're saying as well, but you can't, it's too deep a situation. You just can't tell 10 women, okay, now you're not going to carry guns, when they're actually very fearful, and they have a right to be fearful. So it's a very complicated issue. Secondly, this is a kind of a weird, deep question. I don't know if anyone read The New Yorker, but Malcolm Gladwell has a new piece where he's comparing two books. So he's comparing a book written about the mafia in the 70s and 80s by a journalist, and a book written by an American anthropologist recently about gun violence in America on the East Coast. And you might have heard her, I think her name is Alchemy. I'm not sure what her name is. Anyway, and so she's written a book about drugs and gun violence in Philadelphia. So Malcolm Gladwell took it upon himself to compare these two situations, and Gladwell tends to be a reductionist. In other words, he tends to get ideas and say, okay, this is the way it is, but I want to just run it by you guys. So he says, well, the mafia folks, they were bad, they were violent, they were doing all kinds of violent things, but eventually they graduated from that negativity and became part of the middle class. Whereas the new issues that are happening in urban communities, the gangs, it's becoming more of a perpetuation of generation after generation after generation, and there's no graduation, there's no leaving that kind of life for the suburbs. And as we know, the suburbs are pretty bad in California. So what Gladwell is saying in this piece is he's blaming it on the police, and he's blaming it on technology. And he's saying what the difference between the mafia in the 70s and 80s and what's going on right now in the urban communities is that we have so many ways of gathering intelligence now, and the police are coming into urban communities and they know exactly who's doing what, and they'll pick people up if they have priors or if they're on probation or whatever. And so that's perpetuating the violence in the communities because folks can never kind of grow out of it. So anyway, that's just a scenario, and I just wanted to see what people thought about that.
I don't agree with that. And I do think that we live in not a police state, a prison state. So I believe that if the state is making money and privatized prisons is generating, money, then, hey, then sure. But then you would have to look at schools not educating people well. You would have to look at the entire prison industrial complex. And I think that in itself is violent and the violence that it perpetuates is its own thing. But I do agree with something that you said, which is that people kind of get to graduate from a lifestyle and maybe transition into something else. Because I don't think that it was private prisons making money when the mafia was around, number one. And number two, let's not excuse that they're privileged. Most of the mafia were not people of color. But finally, I think the fact that people can't transition into working class jobs. And so, now, how people say the degree is the new high school diploma, right? And then the master's is the new BA. This very wide gap. And so where somebody might just go work in, I don't know, I bet Officer Armstrong, right? When first people were going into, that's a really good sort of job to transition to if maybe you have some athletic ability. If you didn't have a record and you had a high school diploma or equivalent, you could transfer to a good job that you could have for a long time and get a lot of benefits, right? Now people are coming in with degrees and master's degrees and walking into that position, right? So I think that combination locks people out of the mainstream economy, and then they are trying to, really fulfill those middle class desires in the street economy. That's my opinion.
I would add that, I think that it's a poor comparison specific to Oakland, because if my information is correct, Oakland's violence problem has less and less to do with committed gang membership, especially if you're talking about young black men, young black folk period, and more to do with an inbred culture of violence that's not organized. So if you're talking about the mafia, that was very organized and there's a profit motive. And violence is the tool to get the profit. But now we're talking about, of all the students I've known, and there's one from 2007, actually my first Laney job, who was shot because he was dealing, and he wasn't even in a gang. And that's the one that's closest to that profit motive that I'm aware of. All the rest of them, it was something personal. It was more like what the lieutenant was talking about, you know. And it's more that vengeance thing, and that actually I think it was you. Now I'm getting a little rattled here. The subject just gives me weird anyway. But you know, it was very personal and very human and inhuman at the same time. But it wasn't about profit or organization. That's what terrifies me. We had a young one in the beginning of the spring term who came to Laney to get his books and was walking home with his book bag, and somebody just wanted to jack him for the book bag. Why does that profit then turn into murder when all he wanted to do was steal stuff? How does that click like that? Because mafia is very, very organized, very, very thought out, and this isn't.
Hi, I have 2 questions. I'm sorry I came in late. I was in another meeting. Thank you all. Thank you for Trigan for organizing this, and I think we need you all here more. I'm really appreciative that y'all are here continuing this conversation. And we started meeting last year, I think a couple times because of this urgency. So we were losing our students by the week. We were getting emails that another student in our class got killed, and I think you all probably experienced that with a lot of the youth that you're working with here. And I think for me, I have two questions. One, if you really can think about tangible examples as community workers, right? You interface, you are all in the trenches, you are all in the community, you all come from the community. What is the role of the community college in addressing violence and transforming violence, right? What is our role as instructors, as an institution? What can we do better? What can we do to help you, right? Tangible examples. And then also Michael Brown's on my mind right now. And I think when we talk about the culture of violence, I think we also have to talk about violence definitely is coming on youth, young people in our communities, but it's also coming from the police and our youth. And it's not all police officers, right? But I also know I have a student who was my former mentee who literally got beat up right down the street leaving from school on BART because she was dancing on the BART platform. Nubia Bo, who was dancing on the platform, and who was actually detained for multiple days for dancing on the platform. And so for me, when those incidents happen, it creates even distrust for me with the police, you know? And I know it's not all police officers are bad, but what is the culture we can also change, not just in our communities, but what is the culture change that's happening in the police department? You said you guys are now training restorative justice. What does that look like to change those types of instances from happening so our students don't have to walk home, not just being afraid of that kid down the street, but also being afraid of police officers?
I would say, first of all, how that looks for us in terms of restorative justice is our officers working closely with schools and administrative staff, as well as community-based organizations like Community Works, to participate in that restorative justice process. So in lieu of arrest for a minor offense, officers will recommend that this particular individual participates in the restorative justice process. In that restorative justice process, the officer will sit into that process and help engage with the victim and the person who was responsible to have that dialogue. But still being there to say that, hey, you need to participate in this because this is going to, prevent us from actually putting you in the system, right? We know what happens once a young person is introduced to the criminal justice system. I mean, their rate of recidivism goes out the roof, right? And so we're doing everything we can not to arrest young people, especially to make sure that they have an opportunity to say that I made a mistake and then kind of deal with that mistake, take responsibility for it, and then move on hopefully in a positive direction, right? So that's a part of our program for restorative justice. The second thing that we do, we recognize the fact that, I'm gonna be honest with you, I've been doing this a long time. Police work, we're human beings, and so people make mistakes, and there's some bad apples in the bunch that sometimes make mistakes, and they bring it back to this police profession. I agree with you. But I think for us, from the Oakland Police Department's perspective, we're training our officers now in procedural justice. So if you've heard about this procedural justice concept, it originated in Chicago, the Chicago Police Department. They trained all 10,000 of their officers in procedural justice, which is really learning, asking officers to make sure that they're cognizant of treating people with respect, treating people with dignity, and treating people like human beings. Understand that people, regardless of what they do, still need to be treated with dignity and respect. And so we work hard with trying to provide that information to our officers to deal with some of the issues that come with police work. Police work can become a very cynical profession because they operate with very, negative interactions on a consistent basis. And so we want to reprogram them. We want to have an opportunity to say to them, hey, let's sometimes take a step back and realize that as a profession, we're supposed to treat people a certain way. And so that, as a police department, we begin to take that stance, really train our officers on being cognizant of how we treat people every day. And so, in Oakland, which is different than a lot of cities, our officers wear cameras for all interactions. And so we record those interactions, and not only do we record them, we actually audit those videos. And
Does
then
the public have access to those videos?
the public doesn't have access to those videos, but those videos are audited by our supervisors and our commanders to ensure that these officers are engaging in professional policing. I think that's there's other issues, civil issues. Police officers have rights and things like that, personnel issues that prevent us from providing that to the public. But we internally, we do audit those things and assess our officers' behavior. And that's just a step in us, trying to make sure they're behaving in a manner that's professional, that's service to the community, as opposed to providing some negative interaction that has an enormous impact on people, like you said, that obviously at some point lose trust in our ability to do our jobs effectively. And so I think we're moving in the right direction. I think that we're confronting the fact that this isn't an imperfect profession, that people are going to make mistakes, but we consistently train on how to be better.
I want to say something. First off, back to when she was saying something about the women saying that we feel like we need to carry guns. Me being 21 and living in Oakland and born and raised here, I talk to my brother and I see where he comes from. A lot of women feel like we need to carry a gun. I'm not going to lie. I told myself when I'm 22, I'm going to go and I'm going to try to get me a gun so I can feel protected. The reason why I don't feel protected is because I walk out every day and I have to worry about either some person driving up in a van trying to kidnap me, or I have to worry about something. So it causes me to be aware of my surroundings more, but it also causes me to fear for my life more. I remember one time I was able to, it was like 10 o'clock at night, I was able to walk out the house, go somewhere, and then come back. Now I have to fear of walking down the street or somebody coming up to me behind me or something. And it's just like us women, it's just like where we feel like we need to protect ourselves. And then it goes back to police officers. I commend you on what you guys are trying to do, trying to prevent from all the bad apples to do something good. But if we don't know about that, then we're not going to feel protected. All young men, African American, Hispanic, any young man, they don't feel protected by the police. I walk around every day and I hear somebody saying, F the police, F the police. All of that because they don't feel protected because of all the stuff that happened with Michael Brown, Oscar Grant, Trayvon Martin. All of that is like being seen. So we don't feel protected. So we have to protect ourselves with guns or with knives or with our fist or whatever. We have to find a way to protect ourselves. I feel like if we can come together and join up with her group and the police officers and the journalists and report that this is what they're trying to do, it might change their minds. It's not going to change them off top, but if we can show them that you guys see that we're hurting and you see that you're trying to protect us and trying to make everything right, it might make a difference.
I'll say I agree. No. I mean, I think because I think people don't understand. Like, as a police officer, this is my job, right? I
Right.
mean, so just like journalists want to write a good story, right? We don't want. It's hard to look at the 10 o'clock news and see that somebody else lost their life in the city of Oakland, right? Because that's our responsibility. We take that seriously. We don't want people to die in the city. We don't want people shot. We don't celebrate when something bad happens, right? I mean, because that means that we didn't do what we were supposed to. And in some ways, we have to deal with that. Every day we go out going, man, it's terrible to have to go to another scene. And so it's a defeat for us, right? It's a day where we lose. Every time somebody loses their life, every time a young lady says, tells us a story that they don't feel safe in our community, that's another defeat for us. So, I mean, the officers deal with a lot of that, right? We're understaffed significantly, right? And so we find ourselves every single night, our officers have 100 calls waiting on them to respond to. And so it's a tremendous challenge for them. And to be fighting a fight that's very difficult to see the wins all the time, right? And so we understand that, and I think all of us say that, it's a difficult job, knowing that no matter how hard you work, sometimes you're going to take these losses, and communities are not going to feel safe because you can't protect them. And so that's our challenge, and that's why the partnership with the community, like you said, is so important, so that people know that we care and that it does matter. That's embarrassing for me, being from this community. My whole family and my nieces and nephews feel the same way you feel. My daughters, when they're here at their grandmother's house, they tell me the same thing. I'm afraid to walk to the store, right? I'm afraid to come off the porch. And then for their dad to be a police officer is sort of embarrassing in some ways, that I can't even protect you when you're in the city that I work in. And so I think that is something that, the whole community has to understand, that in order for us to deal with this issue, violence is not just a police issue, right? We can't solve it alone. We're not going to solve it alone. It's a community effort as well. And so part of that ceasefire strategy that we're using is really trying to engage citizens to come out and be a part of that, right? Have that conversation about young people that you can step out and say something to, say, hey, I want you to live. I don't want you to be a victim of violence, right? I mean, a lot of these young people that we run into, and we bring in some of the guys that are really at high risk, and they tell us all the time, nobody cares, nobody says anything to me. Don't nobody care what happens to me. And so he feels like he's out here all alone, facing this violence by himself. And so we as a community have to wrap our arms around these young people and say that we don't want you to lose your life. We also don't want you to take somebody else's life. And so we have to find a way to get them the resources that they need so that they can get themselves out of danger. And so I really feel bad that we don't succeed. That's the difficult part about doing a job, is when you fail.
I mean, if a lot of people really actually take it upon themselves to actually really put themselves in a policeman's uniform and shoes, they will understand that, yeah, you guys are human too. You guys probably feel bad more than the way we feel bad. So it's I just feel like from a police officer's perspective, it needs to be seen. It needs to be heard, because a lot of you guys have quiet voices, and it's just when you out in the field, it's just your whole mindset, your whole atmosphere is different, because you're trying to protect your lives and anybody else's lives. So it's you're putting your life in danger trying to protect somebody else, also thinking that I have a family at home that I need to be there for. But not a lot of people will put themselves in a police officer's shoes because they don't like you guys, because of what past people have done or what they've seen on TV.
I wanted to speak to what you can do as a faculty person here and what Peralta Colleges can do. I think that, and yes, I would love to come into your classrooms. I think you guys should have more community people come and speak in your classrooms. And not just so much to say, this is what's going on, because they know what's going on, but it's helpful to see a couple of things. One, to see that somebody can validate what you've been through and not kind of rub you on the back and say, I understand, but somebody who can say, yes, I understand because I've been through that as well. And to also stand in your classrooms and be able to reflect what it has looked like to transition from some of the things and some of those obstacles that they have faced, to overcome and to move into, you know, a productive or healthy lifestyle that reflects healthy decisions. You know, I'm born and raised in East Oakland. I went through Oakland Public Schools. I lost a brother, gunshot. You know, it's all the same. And I imagine that I'll probably know a lot of your students anyway, because I'm based at Castlemont, right? So it's like we have the same kids. So when I think like that, then it also makes me think, I went to Mills College. Now at Mills, you know, definitely a much more privileged school. So, you know, that they have all these resources. There's somebody to go talk to. You can have a counselor. The chapel is open, right? At a community college, you don't have a lot of those resources, but quite frankly, those resources would be helpful. If you had people that, you know, this is who you can talk to. You have people in that reflect jobs or careers that could come in and speak, and that can help sort of model how to track, how students can track themselves into a career. If you continue to do things that build community, I think that would make a difference. And I know that College of Alameda has the violence prevention course, and I think that that's good. And people can come through that, and they can move into working in some community-based capacity. That was definitely one of the things that saved me. I came into community-based work right out of high school. But thankfully I worked for a woman who said, you know, you are doing the work that high school administrators should be doing, that school resource officers do. So instead of paying us minimum wage, she paid us 3 times minimum wage to be comparable to what other people would do in that position. So I was able to come out of high school making a living wage, right? So maybe advocating for those types of options, and different courses that are going to build up their life skill, their soft skill, and as well as that will be able to track them into a healthy lifestyle, I think would be really good.
I want to offer that we do have some increased expansion in resources. Last semester we opened the men's center inside of the student center, where men can drop in and talk about things with elders who've gone through similar experiences without having to deal with any of the gender things. And the women's center should be opening up this semester. And then the third one, the wellness center, referrals for mental health based on our contract with Asian Health Services. So at the community college level, we are at a point now that the funding is restored where we do have more opportunities to create those resources and to network amongst each other so that we know how to refer people to those resources. But when we get back to the larger community level, I still see that we're fragmented. So then we've got groups over here who are connected, and groups over here who are connected, and people over here connected. But how is there a model? Civil rights, the initial first years of the civil rights, we had all these different components and all these different constituents, and they had a cohesive form of communication. So it was almost like they were almost symbiotic. And it broke down at some point and started to fragment. But could we do, is there an existing model we can follow? Maybe it's a rhetorical question. Maybe we need to create a model that's analogous to that, but appropriate for 2014, where it's not just Laney resources dealing with Laney, and Youth Alive and Youth Uprising dealing with Youth Alive and Uprising, and the police dealing with the connections that you guys have with restorative justice. How can we network everything? Because we need to connect all that in order to be successful on the largest level possible. Otherwise, we're going to have a little bit of success here, a little bit of success there, and it doesn't take more than one dip in the recession before it all crashes. And Measure Y doesn't pass, and then all of a sudden the grants aren't being funded, and the community colleges lose money, so we close the 3 offices that we just opened, and we're right back to where we were 3 years ago when it was definitely worse than I thought. So I'm still trying to find a model that we can follow, because I have no idea where to start. How do we start making all those connections so that when somebody gets into one piece of it, they're accessed to all of it? So no matter what they need, whether they need to have their PTSD addressed, whether they need to have better educational opportunities and career training so that they can get out of the cycle of recidivism, whatever it is, that they're best positioned to be in the middle of a nexus where they can get any piece of it, as opposed to having to find their way into this section or that.
Can you respond?
Well, I would just follow up and say, I think what you're talking about is really a leadership vacuum. And because you have all these wonderful organizations that are doing their work, but they're, to me at least, and having been in Boston where I think it was totally different because you find people much more united. But what I don't see happening in Oakland is someone with kind of a larger vision who is looking across the spectrum at what we're doing. And, you know, you mentioned something very interesting about the jobs. You know, when my parents were younger, they were from Oakland, went to McClymonds, you know, there were these jobs like you could get in manufacturing, and they would pay really good wages. Those jobs are gone. And so then the question is, kind of how do you make people feel like they have a stake and that they have some option to have, like what you're talking about, a healthy lifestyle? And it just seems to me that, and I know some of this is going on, but with the technology and the fact that people are so good with working, you know, their smartphones and all the rest of this. And I know, like, for instance, Youth Radio is trying to train people to take advantage of some of these opportunities, you know, that are sitting right up here in Silicon Valley. But, you know, you've got kind of the whole spectrum, but I don't have any idea as I look at this, you know, across the spectrum, you should be able to see, okay, like, you know, you just mentioned the whole issue of trauma here. And like, so we know actually that not only do these kids, when you're exposed to that kind of prolonged trauma over and over and over, that it actually like affects, you know, the wiring in your brain. I mean, what do we know about, like, okay, do we have enough of those trauma services here? You know, what's happening on the job front? What's happening on the law enforcement front? And it just, there's not kind of, you know, anyone kind of looking at the larger view. And I really think that that's a problem of, you know, in large part, you know, political leadership and, you know, lack thereof, personally.
I think there's even more of an opportunity there because, as you said, the tech companies have been shamed. They've been shamed for their lack of diversity. They've also been shamed for, in large part, bringing on a tremendous affordability crisis on the Bay Area, and they're making tons of money, and they're being shamed for not giving back. I mean, especially in San Francisco, but we're seeing the effects here in Oakland, and I think this is a tremendous time to go to them and say, yes, everybody's giving you a hard time. Here's something that you could do to do it better. And Google, you know, I know about Hack the Hood. They are giving some money there. The nice thing about tech companies is they all want to compete with each other. Mm-hmm. Go to Yahoo, go to Microsoft. I mean, I think that there is an opportunity there to get funding to really create new opportunities for young people in Oakland.
But again, not everybody wants to go into tech. We got to be also really clear. There has to be some realistic jobs. I don't know. Sometimes it feels like the tech industry is like making it to the NBA, especially for, you know, where I come from and what I see. I don't know anybody that works at Google. I'm third generation Oakland. You know, I was here before Google was here. I don't know anybody that works there. I just finished an MBA program. I don't know anybody that works there, you know? So there's also a lot of just like working class, real, true, even, you know, jobs in the community that need to happen and that just need to occur. And if the emphasis is on building up their skill level, just as much as it is having places to plug them into, then I think that helps too.